Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar on sustainability strategies for the European clothing sector. I'm Susan Harris, I'm Technical Director for Apparel and Thesis. We're presenting this webinar on behalf of RAP, who are the project lead for the European Clothing Action Plan project. This webinar is going to look specifically at the Sustainable Fibres action area of the ECAP project and some of the exciting things that work has achieved, including a couple of case studies. Before we make a start, I'll just share a few things on housekeeping. You will all be muted at the moment on the call, so don't worry that we'll hear any of the background noise from you guys at the moment. When it comes to time to ask any questions, there's a question function that you can use to type your questions in, and on the screen here you can see where it's located. That will be really helpful, and then we can take those questions at the end of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded. It will be available on the ECAP website for anyone who'd like to view it. And following the webinar, you'll be emailed a short survey, which we'd love it if you can take just 1 minute to complete. So that covers off the housekeeping for today. In terms of the agenda today, I'm just here to give you guys a welcome and chair the session. I'm going to then hand over to my colleague Ria Carney, who will be able to give a bit of an introduction to the ECAP programme, this particular action area and the work that's been done. Then we've got some first-hand insights from Beth Greenway at Zalando and Christina Teya at House of Dagmar. Following that, we'll have some Q&A, and then it'll be time to finish up. So that's what we're going to cover today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague Ria Carney, who's Associate Director here at Anthesis. She joined us from Made By, who were one of the original ECAP project partners, and Anthesis has continued to work with RAP to deliver the project. So it's over to you, Ria.
Great, thank you, Susan, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to have the opportunity to be part of the webinar today and to speak to you all about our involvement in ECAP. So I will spend the next 15 minutes introducing you briefly to ECAP for those that are not aware of the programme, and we'll then take you through in a bit more detail the Sustainable Fibres action area and some of the key insights from this work with a range of European-based apparel brands and retailers. Next slide. So by way of introduction to the programme, RAP had previously produced a report called Mapping the Clothing Impacts Across Europe, which provides the wider context for the ECAP programme. So to highlight some of the key findings, the total quantity of clothing consumed in the EU in 2015 was estimated at 6.4 million tonnes, and RAP estimates this clothing volume to have an annual carbon footprint of 195 million tonnes of CO2, a water footprint of over 46 million cubic meters, and a waste footprint of over 11 million tonnes. The clothing industry is, of course, vitally important in the European Union, and yet the environmental impacts, as you can see, are incredibly high. And so it's on this basis that the European Clothing Action Plan was developed and launched in order to undertake targeted action to reduce these impacts in a holistic way. Next slide, please. So the overarching aim of the programme is to cut the environmental impact across the European clothing supply chain and generate value for business through collaboration, measuring and sharing best practice. It is a €3.6 million project supported by EU Life funding that has been delivered by a unique consortium of specialist organisations, and it will run until the end of 2019. The 5 partner organisations have worked since it launched in 2015 to achieve the setup and delivery of a framework that supports this overarching aim with ambitious targets set relating to clothing waste diversion from landfill and incineration, as well as carbon and water savings. It is being achieved through action plans that are focused on different stages of the product life cycle, led by the different partners. And these partners include RWS, part of the Dutch Ministry for Infrastructure and Water Management, LWARD, which is the London Waste and Recycling Board, the Global Fashion Agenda, previously known as the Danish Fashion Institute, or DAFI, Made By up until November of last year, and also RAP, who coordinate and evaluate the programme. Next slide, please. I think, could you go back one slide, Elle? I think it skipped forward. Yeah, perfect, thank you. So as I mentioned, the program is delivered through a series of different action areas, which you can see outlined here in the diagram. So just to briefly explain what those action areas are. The Global Fashion Agenda focused on influencing design practices, engaging designers and buyers in more sustainable design practices through the launch of the Design for Longevity platform. RWS has worked on 3 action areas. So one focused on government procurement, influencing how European governments procure more sustainable apparel for the public sector. A second focused on improving textile collection rates, working with local municipalities across Europe to improve textile collections. And lastly, a third looking at integrating recycled fibres, working with brands to integrate recycled fibres into their products through a series of pilots. And LWARB and RAP have both focused on engaging consumers on how to use and dispose of their garments more sustainably, with LWARB working specifically with the 16 to 25-year-old age group. So today's focus, as we've said, is specifically on the last action area, so the Sustainable Fibres action area, which was, as Susan mentioned, previously delivered by Made By, who was an ECAP partner, and since Anthesis bought over the Made By assets at the end of last year, this last phase of work is now being delivered by Anthesis on behalf of RAP. Next slide, please. So I'll now explain in a bit more detail the Sustainable Fibres action area before you hear directly from 2 of the participants. So this area was targeted with working directly with a range of European-based apparel brands and retailers to help them to develop and implement a sustainable fibre strategy to enable them to switch from conventional fibres and achieve improvements in the environmental footprint associated with the fibre usage, and in turn contribute to the overarching ECAP targets. Another key outcome is related to the opportunity to share knowledge and learning with others to encourage them to source more sustainable fibres and to improve their fibre mix for the benefit of the apparel supply chain. And this webinar today forms a part of that knowledge sharing aspect. Next slide, please. So the area has involved over 10 different European brands and retailers. And as you can see here, these include a diverse cross-section in terms of size, product offer, and market. So today, as Susan mentioned, you hear directly from retailers Zalando and also brand House of Dagmar. So great that they're able to join us to provide their first-hand experience of sustainable fibre sourcing and of the programme itself. Next slide. So the action area was structured around a few key steps which the brands and retailers have worked through with support from the Made By and then the Anthesis team. So firstly, participants undertook a fibre baseline, and this provided an overview of their fibre footprint and associated environmental impacts using a calculator tool developed by RAP. We then used the baseline results to inform the development of a strategy and targets to integrate more sustainable fibres into the fibre mix. Participants then focused on implementing their sustainable fibre strategy with additional guidance as needed from ourselves. And a fibre endline has then been conducted as one of the final steps in order to track progress and measure uptake of sustainable fibres over the last 3 to 4 years, with some participants also undertaking midline assessments as well in order to have an annual measure of their progress. And lastly, we're focused now on communicating and sharing learnings across the sector. So the webinar, for example, will be accompanied by a final report and a series of individual case studies, which will be published for others to benefit from. So hopefully for many of you on the line today, they will provide a useful resource as you consider your own approach to sourcing sustainable fibres. So as we come to the end of this action area and gather feedback through these case studies, we're now reflecting on the outcomes, and today I will take you through some of the general insights and learnings that we've been able to gather. Next slide. So to summarize some of the key learnings that we can share with you today. So firstly, understanding your fibre baseline is a valuable first step. So the insight gained through the footprints has been beneficial for participants, enabling them to understand exactly what they are sourcing, how much, and where the impacts are within their collections. Many find it a useful tool to support internal communication, as well as providing the basis to track changes within their fibre mix. And being able to track changes has proved a good motivation internally. Some have even seen healthy competition develop between teams around working towards and meeting their sustainable sourcing targets, for example. So to give you a little bit of insight into those footprints, the majority find the bulk of their fibre mix to be made up of three main categories: conventional cotton, synthetics, primarily coming from polyester, and also cellulosics. So many have prioritized sourcing more sustainable cotton, focused on switching to organic, better cotton, cotton made in Africa, and recycled cotton, as well as starting to switch to recycled polyester and more sustainable man-made cellulosic fibre options. So secondly, invest in internal engagement. So many raise the need to prioritize internal engagement from the outset, especially given the cross-functional nature of sourcing fibres and the need to engage across the business to ensure understanding and buy-in for the sustainable fibre sourcing strategy and any change in internal systems and processes. So thirdly, talking frequently to your suppliers is critical. Participants all mentioned the importance of talking to their supply chain early on and repeatedly to understand what they can offer in terms of more sustainable options and to make sure they know exactly what you are looking to source. So this helps to drive awareness and to encourage the market for more sustainable options as well. Several find that many suppliers could offer sustainable options, but they didn't offer them up unprompted, for example. So brands have been recognizing the value in investing in these relationships while seeing suppliers start to understand how being proactive could be commercially beneficial for themselves as well. So fourth is talking to your counterparts. Several express the value of being able to talk to their counterparts when possible, other sustainability or sourcing managers, for example, from other brands and supply chain partners in a pre-competitive sense, in order to share challenges, experiences, and also to share solutions too. And lastly, learning by doing is an essential part of the sustainable fibres journey. So many recognized there is no easy fix or one way to source more sustainable fibres, and learning by doing has been an essential part of the process, including making mistakes, having to rethink their approach, and recognizing the need to evolve their priorities over time. They also find that being able to communicate mistakes and challenges internally as well as with suppliers has also helped them to highlight the need for collaboration and for continuous improvement. Next slide. So in terms of concrete achievements and improvements, several general ones have become evident as we have reflected recently with participants on this work. So firstly, an increased uptake of more sustainable fibres. So as we finalise the end-line footprints, they are providing insight into how the proportions of more sustainable fibres are changing. So these end lines, along with the baselines and the midlines, will be evaluated by RAP in the coming months, and a report will be released summarising the aggregated results. But we know from first look that generally speaking, there's been a positive uptake of more sustainable fibres. Secondly, improved internal processes. To support this uptake of more sustainable fibres, some participants have commented on how their sourcing priorities have led to improvements in internal systems and processes, which, whilst challenging and time-consuming for some at first to adapt, are now making it easier to measure accurately and to track progress with more standardised ways of working across departments or across several brands within one group. Thirdly, improved internal engagement and capacity. And many that we've spoken to have been pleased to see the increased level of internal engagement and knowledge on sustainable fibres as a result of working towards their sourcing targets with a greater sense of empowerment over sourcing choices and engaging with suppliers. And this extends across the company in some cases, from designers, buyers and sourcing teams, but right through to senior management, sales teams and store employees as well, for example. And lastly, growing market demand. Some brands are starting to be asked for more sustainable products from the different marketplaces through which their brand is sold. So their work to integrate sustainable fibres into their collections has been valuable in helping to raise their profiles and strengthen their relationship with these selling channels. Next slide. So to finish off, I will summarize some of the key recommendations that the ECAP brands and retailers had for others who are starting out on this topic. So firstly, understand your starting point. So undertake a fibre footprinting exercise to understand exactly what you are sourcing and in what volumes and the associated impacts. Secondly, prioritize your actions and resources. So with your baseline insights, you can prioritize the key fibre categories to start with, rather than trying to tackle all fibres at once. Focus on major fibre groups first, or where you can achieve quicker wins across key lines or product categories. Thirdly, nominate dedicated resource. Have a dedicated person, for example, or a team or department, depending on your size, who is responsible for overseeing sustainable fibre sourcing and product development to really push the topic forward and embed the necessary knowledge and processes within the business. Number 4, communicate clearly and frequently with senior management, with internal teams, and with the supply base to highlight your sourcing ambitions and the sustainable fibres and materials you are seeking. So firstly, this is key for raising awareness and securing buy-in, but ongoing, it is key to communicate progress with internal teams, with sales teams and customers, so that achievements are understood and celebrated, acting as a key motivation to keep going. And lastly, stay informed. Keep informed about sustainable fibre and material developments, whether through suppliers, the media, other brands, and other sector organisations, to help you understand what is possible and to inform your own strategy, given the pace at which the market is evolving, particularly for those sourcing more technical fabrics or looking for increasingly more innovative alternatives. So that's a very quick summary of the work and findings to date for this action area. I will leave it there so that I can hand back to Susan to introduce the next speaker. So thank you very much, and back to you, Susan.
Thanks very much, Ria. That was really interesting. And now I'd like to hand over to one of the retailers who's participated in ECAP and in this action area, Beth Greenaway, who's Senior Sustainability Manager at Zalando. Beth, without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks Susan, and thanks to everybody for having me. It's really nice to be able to share our learnings. It's been quite a journey, so hopefully I can share some useful tips for everybody who's listening in today. If we go to the next slide, please. So a bit about the company for those who maybe don't know who we are. We are a German company. We were founded just over 10 years ago in Berlin, and we are Europe's largest online fashion platform. So for those living in the UK, we're basically very similar to ASOS. We just have a very large share of third-party brands and brand partners. So we have around 2,000 brands on our platform. And within that, we also have our own private label assortment. And this covers clothing, shoes and accessories across the different genders and kids as well. And that's what we for the private labels, that was what we did for ECAP. So really looking at our private label assortment, our own production, where our footprint was, and focusing on that. And ECAP really was a big step on our sustainability journey. So it was one of the first programs that we joined when we were thinking about how to deal with sustainability and more sustainable fibres. And it really was quite instrumental in helping us develop our first sustainable fibre strategy. So yeah, it's been a great ride. Next slide, please. So back in 2016, we had started in 2015 already thinking about how we wanted to do this and what kind of made sense. And then in addition to a number of different industry initiatives, we joined ECAP because we felt like it was the one that was most specific to fibre sourcing and really giving us a toolkit in terms of how to do that. So we joined in 2016 with the aim of really understanding what are we sourcing, what are the impacts, and what can we use, what kind of tools can we use to address that. We wanted to really understand also how our private labels fitted into our larger carbon footprint. So for the last few years, we've also done, as a company, a carbon footprint of Zalando, and just to understand, okay, how much is coming from our fibre footprint, how much is coming from logistics and all the different business areas that we have. So the ECAP tool was actually really useful to help us slot that information into the overall footprint. And we also really appreciated the structured approach of the programme, so having the initial baseline, having the endline report, having midway points in between to kind of check in on where we were. And obviously having a third-party consultancy was also really helpful. So not only in terms of training, but in terms of also being a listed company, it's always useful to have somebody else looking at your numbers and saying, no, this is true. So that was really a benefit for us to be able to report on that. And we'll be hopefully releasing the results in this year's annual report coming up. And I think the final bonus point was also just having some experience previously of SCAP. So that's the UK equivalent of ECAP. A colleague had previous experience of this and so kind of understood the tools and how the programme worked, and I think had positive experience with that. So that's why we decided to go for it. Next slide, please. So just tagging on to what Ria said, I think we had a very similar story. So we identified cotton as our most used fibre. It actually makes up almost 50% of our entire mix. So cotton is a really, really important fibre for us. And we didn't actually realise how much cotton we were sourcing as a total percentage. So I think that was one of the key things coming out of the footprint, was just understanding, okay, wow, we're using this much, you know, this is really something that we should be focusing on. And then again, tagging on to what she said, our two other main fibres were polyester and viscose. And together they made up almost 90% of our total fibre mix. And this was really important for us to start setting priorities and to understand where should we be spending our time. Obviously, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort when you're looking into each specific fibre. So although we might be using 10 or 15 different fibres in total, if we only have 3 that are making up 90%, then that's where we decided, you know, that's worth spending our time on. So that's how we kind of finalised our strategy to focus on those. And I would say the main things that we did in order to source more sustainable options for those fibres was joining the Better Cotton Initiative. So that was a big help for us in terms of understanding, you know, what's already going on in the industry, what existing initiatives are there that we can kind of piggyback on. And I think the Better Cotton Initiative is a great example for that. They've done so much work over the last few years that they've been going. They're now at about 20% of total cotton volume in the world that's produced. And it's one that suppliers know about, that's quite easy to source and that tends to be pretty price neutral. So it was a great option for us to already start switching into a more sustainable option, you know, with the thought of then kind of transitioning into more organic at different times later. The other thing we did was partner with Canopy Style on the viscose piece. So that's they're an NGO that's specifically focused on forest protection. So with viscose, there's two kind of sustainability issues. The one is the wood pulp and where that comes from that goes into the fibre, and the other is the chemical management and practices around making that pulp then into a fibre. And Canopy is, I think, one of the leading NGOs really working on the endangered forest kind of sourcing aspect of that, and so we partnered with them, and they have some great tools in terms of ranking viscose suppliers on their forest management practices and really, you know, helping us understand what can we start asking for, what better option, and like I said, just taking advantage of things that already existed. We weren't reinventing the wheel. Next slide, please. So I think some of our key insights and learnings, very similar to what Ria said. I think a clear message from management is really, really needed, and it does take time to adapt internal processes and systems before placing the orders and going ahead. And I think this was one of the things that, you know, once we've got our teams on board and they were really excited and doing it and they just wanted to go, and we had to say, okay, hold on a second, we need to do this, this and this, we need to change this, and the technical sides of things, especially if you're in a larger business or maybe you're working with legacy systems, legacy tooling that is not really the best for the time that you're in, or 2019 as we are now, does take some time. So I think just understanding that, you know, the will needs to be there and the message needs to be there, but at the same time, you really need to understand how your systems work and the kind of order placement process and what you need to do with that. A second big learning for us was that the KPIs of this programme are specifically quite environmental, so looking at water, carbon and waste. But we found when we were engaging the teams that the social aspects of going for these more sustainable fibre choices actually was a big factor in kind of getting them on board and engaging them. So for example, talking about better cotton, there's obviously lots of great things going on in terms of water saving practices, and they're using less pesticides and more natural methods of keeping pests away, and different things in terms of the environmental side. But also what really helped was telling the farmer stories and saying, you know, by doing this, we are contributing to, you know, people earning a better living and being able to have higher yields, and for example, supporting female empowerment in countries like Pakistan, where you don't get many female farmers, and different things like this was really helpful in driving that engagement. Similarly, I think with fibres like nylon, telling the story of something like ECONYL, which is coming from the ocean, and we're contributing to taking plastic out of the ocean and helping marine life, and all those kinds of stories, I think really help with engagement. And I think another thing is just, you know, using quick wins to keep the momentum and keep the positivity going. So I think we saw quite quickly some quite big impacts. For example, when we started using BCI, even though, you know, organic would be the best option and we would be working towards that, I think with better cotton we were still surprised to see how much of a reduction in water we actually had, even without it being organic. So I think those kind of wins, you know, show that you're making progress, and then you can kind of move on to the next step in the journey. I think one challenge we had was with sourcing recycled polyester. So it does tend to be a bit more expensive, some cases quite significantly more expensive. I think there's issues around the chain of custody, and there's issues around minimum order quantities. And we found that kind of going actually a bit deeper in the supply chain and trying to foster relationships with our mills actually really helped that. So if you can buy bigger and in bulk, then you generally get better prices. And I think we haven't figured it out quite totally yet, but I think that was one way that did help us in sourcing recycled polyester. Next slide, please. So in terms of achievements over the last 2 or 3 years, last year, for the year of 2018, we had sourced 7% of our total cotton volume as better cotton, and that was actually our first year of sourcing, and that was what felt like a really big achievement at the time, because we actually did that only in 6 months. So a lot of that time was really spent prepping, as I said, thinking about systems, thinking about ordering, understanding just how better cotton works, how the mass balance system works, how to figure it out with suppliers, how did we need orders to be placed, all that type of thing. And really just the understanding in the teams, getting it to that point took a long time. But then when we were set up and we could really go, the sourcing just sped up exponentially. And we were actually working towards a 30% target for the end of this year, which we are on a good way to achieving. So I think even that, just that kind of progress in a year or a year and a half is incredible, and I think gives us a lot of motivation and hope that we can continue sourcing more and then sourcing other fibres instead as well. I think building onto that, our teams are now much more aware of sustainable fibre choices. When we started, we did a quick, hands up if you've ever heard of this or if you've ever worked with this before, and I think we had 1 or 2 hands out of a big filled room, and we really had to kind of start from scratch, just understanding, explaining why are we doing this, why is it important, what are the types of issues, how can we do this, and spending a lot of time in engagement. And now the great thing is that the teams know what all of these different things are, even though it's a very complex field, and they're going off and very autonomously and very independently driving this topic by themselves and asking suppliers and driving different topics, and that's great. And now we don't have to handhold as much, which is really brilliant. And I think now, having focused on the 3 main fibres that I talked about before, now we have a clear plan for them. We have started now looking into other materials, as we were saying, more innovative materials, also looking at processing, and because we also have a high share of footwear and accessories, which is maybe different to other brands, That's also something now that we've started to look into, which is not included in ECAP because it's the clothing action plan, but is now has set the kind of groundwork and the baseline for us to start looking into that in the future. Next slide, please. So I think my advice to others getting started would really be to engage with the senior management as early as possible. I think their support is key. And it might be that you need to raise the topic in every meeting, or make sure it's on the agenda at every meeting, or make sure that they are asking when they're reviewing progress with the teams and with targets, that is all in there, because a lot of the time it really has to come from the top, and teams want to do it, but if they're getting other pressures or time pressure or price pressure, it is obviously just easier and quicker to go for the conventional option. So I think having that support is really, really key. As I said, I think allowing time, especially if you're the one doing this or your team is the one doing this, just working out existing internal processes. So with the teams that we found really important was to explain how we were going to do this. So not just, well, it's better because of this and this, but what does that mean? How do I place an order now? Which system do I do this in? What do I need to tell my supplier? When can I expect this to come through? So all of these much more practical things is really how it starts getting integrated into business. Otherwise, it just becomes a nice thing on top that you would like to do, but it really needs to be integrated. And I think leading on from that, just understanding the business strategy. So what is the business trying to do? If it wants to go into selling lots more cotton t-shirts, then maybe don't spend all your time trying to source recycled polyester if that's not important. So I think really making sure that what you're doing and what the business is doing is aligned, and equally that you understand the baseline impact. So again, if half of your mix is cotton, then maybe start with that before focusing on something like wool if that's less than 5% of what you're doing. So I think it's understanding where the quick wins are and where the big focus topics are as well. So start with just one or two to focus your impact and manage your time. And I think this is also just in terms of making sure that you can keep going and you can keep giving the support and your time and the emotional support that goes into a lot of this. So giving yourself 10 million things to do and trying to do everything at once is not going to help. It's just going to be confusing for the people that you work with, and it will end up not being that much fun for you either. So I think just focusing on one or two things at the time, and then getting those running, and then you can keep adding on more and more and more. And that's definitely been our journey. So as Ria said, I think learning by doing, absolutely. Giving yourself time, understanding that things take time and that it's really, really key to get people completely engaged and on board. And just, letting the process kind of teach you a little bit and work itself out, and kind of growing with the industry as more and more technologies emerged and more innovative materials, and there's lots of exciting things going on. But I think to start with the baseline and start with the biggest fibres that you use is a great starting point. And I think that's me done. Yes, thank you very much. I'll hand back now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Beth. That was really interesting to hear about the work you've been doing, and you sound really enthusiastic and inspired, which is great. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to hand over to Christina Schade from House of Dagmar, who's Sustainability Manager there, to talk a bit about the work that they've been doing as part of the programme. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and hello everybody. And thank you so much, Beth, for sharing all your experience and your goals. It's really interesting to hear about. I'm going to talk also about what we're aiming for and what we have our steps during the way. So please take next slide, please. So for you who doesn't know about our company, it's a brand called Dagmar, and we started our company almost 14 years ago. It's me together with my two sisters, Karin and Sophia, who started it. And the reason we started was because our late grandmother Dagmar was very good on qualities and sewing a lot, and she was teaching us when we were kids, and we wanted to take her heritage and create a brand. And today still our style is still very much inspired of her sense for quality and timeless fashion. And we really want to create sustainable and expressive collections where we focus a lot in knits. And we have noticed that knits is a little bit more of a challenge than woven garments. I will talk about this later on. And our ambition to create the responsible collections is because we don't want to damage the ecosystem. And we also want to inspire our customers to invest in high quality pieces so that they can have them for a longer lifespan than the average clothing item. And I think it's important. And the way we design our clothes is not for a specific collection or a specific season, but instead garments from these different collections can be used together, and you can style from year to year and season by season. And we want to create longevity and more of a lifestyle than short trends. So the picture you can see is also from the current collection that is out now, a knitted dress. And I will talk a lot about future qualities further on. So please go over to next slide. We wanted to work with sustainability already since the start, but we called it quality at that time. Sustainability was not really a trend word by then, but during the way we noticed that it became even more and more important. And the main reason is that we want people to really cherish our garment and wear them over and over. And we want to deliver clothes that are responsibly made, and we don't want to damage the world around us. So we decided that we needed to create our collections without compromising, and we want them to be 100% sustainable and aesthetic. So that is a goal that we put a couple of years ago, that we want to take it to 100%. We're not there yet, but I really hope that we can reach to that goal. And we decided to join ECAP because we found out that we could learn a lot and get a great help along the way. And we felt also a bit insecure about our knowledge. And by joining ECAP and the fiber workshops that we had, we felt more and more secure about our decisions, and also something that we can talk about and inspire our customers. So our goal is to offer 100% more sustainable fiber collections by 2025 than the average fiber. So, and with the longevity of a garment, negative impact on the environment is really the parameter that we have. And it's sometimes a little bit difficult, because if you use, for example, recycled fibers, maybe the quality is more poor than if you use virgin fibers, but we need to find the right balance and the parameters to make the garment last as long time as possible, in the same time as keeping the price on a level where it's affordable. And a bigger goal is that we would like our business, the whole company, to be climate neutral. That is something that we are trying to understand how we could reach by the help of and support of ECAP. We find it very challenging, and since we are producing, we're always making a footprint, but somehow we think that by reorganizing the structure of our business methods, we can also help. So please, next slide. So our key focus areas. Our mission is to decrease the impact of carbon dioxide, water and waste from our collections. And by getting the help of ECAP to measure our footprint, we could target 3 focus areas. The first one is that we want to increase the use of more sustainable fibers that also have the least negative impact on the environment. And that will include also continuously sourcing for more recycled fibers or for new developments. The second one is that we want to develop a long-term business model that supports a circular economy. We think that's very important, that with a lifetime that it goes over and over and again, and they can use your garments as long as possible, and when you don't use them any longer, you can reuse the quality and so that we keep that span. The third one is that we would really like to fully understand how we could reach our goal to become climate neutral. This is something that we're working on, and we're going to have workshops, and this is something that we're going to spot on further on. But one other important thing is that we think it's very, very important to inspire and educate the consumers, because that's going to be a key factor so that they can start consuming the right goods. So next slide, please. So our key insights is that when we started to measure, the fibers that we used the most in our collections was viscose, cotton, and wool. So and that was also where we had the biggest impact. So we were a bit surprised about the wool, for example, since that is a quality that normally lasts for a very long time. But we found out that it takes enormous energy to produce the wool, and it takes a lot of water, and you get a lot of waste. So that was a really big focus area for us, and we have found some ways that we think are really interesting. And we also discovered that organic cotton, that we switched all our cotton or all our traditional cotton to organic cotton. But on the other hand, the organic cotton takes more water than viscose. So it's always very difficult to understand the trade-offs between more sustainable alternatives and the impact that it has. So that has been really a key challenge and a lot of learning for us, what choices to make and what steps to take. And for us, it's very important to keep the nature as well as the people who work, as well as animals around. So we try to always find the balance. We did a focus on the wool, and some studies suggest that the use of recycled wool versus virgin wool gives a 95% reduction in carbon and 85% reduction in water use, which I think is enormous. So for us, that has been a really interesting wake up, that we have started to add in as much recycled wool as we can afford for the quality and the longevity of a garment into our garments, which means that then will have not as big footprint after this. I think also it's very important to communicate with your customers, and so that because they do not yet seem to understand really what choices to make. And I think even people who work in the industry think it's very difficult. So it's quite natural that the main consumer doesn't really know. They have just learned about food, I think, and maybe learning a bit about cars and so on. So I think it's our responsibility to inform them and to give them the right choices to make. But one other, please, can you please go back? I have one more. Yes, thank you. There is also one insight that was very important for us, that we realized that by connecting our own internal sustainability goals to the external issues really helped to engage our teams. And it's been a really effective driver for a management team to understand why a circular business could bring also new business opportunities. Now we can go to next, please. So our achievements has been that from when we started to measure in 2017, we had 7% of sustainable fibers. And now only in 2 years' time, we have increased to 25%. That has given us a really good understanding what impact different fibers have and how we can take action to address them. And I think by truly understanding how design decisions can impact the overall footprint of the product is really a key point. So we are organizing an internal workshop after the summer in our company for everybody to focus on the planning and the designing, but also so that your design goes hand in hand with how you can recycle a garment, and also how we can engage with recycles. And I think understanding the importance of engaging the customers again is really important. So we decided to launch a new hang tag that we call Good Choice, so that people easily can make the simple choice already in the store or on the web where they buy. In the future, we hope that we maybe don't need this Good Choice hang tag, but that will be when our collections are 100% sustainable. You know, we have a little bit more, we have some more steps to take before we reach that, but I think it's going to go. And we're planning in this to do some things. We want to have a green flagship store, for example, where we can inspire everybody. And we want to have a physical Dagmar Decade store where we will encourage people to hand in and buy secondhand clothes. We're also collaborating with a Swedish company called Renewcell, who develop regenerated viscose fibers. So it's now, right now, under the development to start using for our knitted garments. And then also we have this Swedish organization called Stika, where we have started to measure our carbon footprints. That is also very interesting to see what footprint we do from our transports and production and so on. So please take the next step. My advice to the others to get started is to really start understanding the baseline of your impact and where your key areas are, where the footprint is the biggest. And I think also to get really the management team to understand both that the business method and the brand vision, so that they go hand in hand and what positive effects it can have. I think that's very important. And in our company, it's been really very much driven by our employees who have really a passion for sustainability, and they have inspired the management team as well to now really understand and cherish for this. I think also it's very important next step that you structure a long-term business model that aligns to your brand values, but also with a circular economy. I think that will be really key for companies to have a healthy business and eco-friendly industry in the future. So finally, like to connect your own sustainability goals and include sustainable fiber strategy to external issues. That really helps people to understand the importance of these goals.
Great.
And I think that was everything I had to say for now.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was really interesting. It sounds like you've been doing some inspiring work too. Thank you both for sharing about the exciting work that you've been doing under the ECAP program. Now it's time for some questions, and I see that we have some that have come through here. To get started with, Ria, can I direct this one to you, because I think it might be a fairly short answer. Some people have asked for more info on this process of calculating the fibre footprint and the baseline for that. Is that something that they can find online?
So, I I'm just thinking, can they find it online? I'm just thinking through to what we've got published ourselves. There will be information on the ECAP website. And I think on one of our last slides, we'll flick up the website address for the ECAP website. So there's some details there in terms of this particular action area that I've described. And as I say, the case studies, etc., will all be there as well. In terms of the kind of simple steps, if that helps for me to kind of explain that to the people that are interested, really what it's based on is looking at product data, your product order data, for example, or product sales data, looking at, for examples, it would really be a breakdown of, let's say, your different product types across department, across brand, if those are interesting for you to get kind of those kind of very specific breakdowns departmentally or by brand if you have multiple brands within the group, but also looking at kind of units, volumes, and then what's key is the fibre composition piece. And once we have all of that information together, then that is analysed to give us then a fibre breakdown, really. So it looks at total amount of fibre that you're sourcing across those different fibre categories, and then the work that we've done through ECAP with RAP using their tool is to then plug that into the tool, and that's what then pushes out the information around the associated environmental impacts as well, around carbon, water and waste. So if anyone is interested in more information on that and wants to get in contact with me directly, then we can certainly follow up.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ria. Then
sure.
A couple of questions for our speakers. A few people have asked about what your reductions in carbon and water have been through this process. What kind of reductions have you made? Have you had a chance to look at that in detail yet? And what is it showing you? Who shall I go to first? Beth, perhaps. Do you have anything you'd like to share on that? And then I'll pass over to Christina.
Sure. So I think we're still in the process of completely finalising that. So what I can show at the moment is that we definitely we were surprised at the very positive reduction, or the good, strong reduction that we'd had on water. So that, I think, was the key thing for us. When you switch to more sustainable cotton, that's usually the one that is the most impacted, just because of the water use of cotton. I think if you were looking at using recycled options, then the carbon tends to be more impacted. So for us, it's really been water. I can't share, unfortunately, the specific numbers on that. We will hopefully, as I said, be sharing them in our annual report, which will be coming out at the start of next year.
Fantastic. That sounds really interesting. Thank you. And Christina, have you got anything to share in terms of carbon and water footprint reductions through this process?
Yes, I would like to include what Beth is saying, that when you switch from traditional fibers to organic fibers or recycled fibers, there is a big change. For example, for us, when we noticed that from the use of virgin wool to add recycled wool has an enormous impact, so much better result. And we are still also analyzing our first results from the changes we have made, and we can see it's a positive effect. And we are also planning to report them annually, and we are also actually measuring our carbon footprint by the Swedish organization STICA. So we have also in the plan to start showing our results and reporting that annually. So hopefully it's going to come further on as soon as we have settled everything and made our analysis. But we have got the first just big results that we can see that by using better fibers you get a better result.
Excellent, that's really useful, thank you.
Okay.
But quite a lot of interesting questions coming through, and I don't think we'll have time to answer them all, so I'm trying to select a representative group. One of the next ones is about government policy. Looking across Europe, would you say government policy is helping or hindering? Would you like to see clearer regulation, or do you feel that this kind of collaborative initiative approach is what works best? Christina, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. In Sweden, we don't really have any governmental regulations. However, I can see that the interest is increasing about this, and it might be in the future, but I think it's maybe more healthy if the organizations have their own real interest and want to do this for real. So that you can have a holistic view. And also, I think in order for it to work, you need to also have the economic business strategy that needs to, that financials needs to be aligned with the sustainability goals. Otherwise, it's never going to work.
That makes a lot of sense. So that kind of self-initiated fitting within the business aims. And what about you, Beth? Do you have any thoughts on whether regulation is the right approach, or?
I don't want to comment on whether it's the right approach. I think it's coming, so it's kind of irrelevant whether it's the right approach or not. I think there's a lot of talk at the moment, especially with circular economy being a big issue, waste being a big issue. We know we have a limited carbon budget that we hopefully won't use up in the next 8 to 11 years. So I think there's a lot coming down the road, and I would just say it makes sense to get ahead of that curve now. So if you can set it up yourself, obviously if there's the engagement and the motivation within the business anyway, fantastic. If there isn't, then I think that's a really good argument to do it. So let's get ahead of it now before it comes anyway and captures us maybe when we're not prepared. Yeah, I think that's the way it will go. So that's it.
Very useful, thank you. And another question that's come through, I guess many people in this webinar will be interested to find out, have been interested to find out more about ECAP. What's the future of ECAP post 2019? Valerie, who is the project manager from RAP, you're on the line. Do you have anything you could share about what happens next?
Hello, hopefully you can hear me because I am having a bit of technology problem.
Well, thank you, Valerie.
Okay, that's good. So in terms of the project, yes, it does end at the end of this year, so in December 2019. We are posting all the outputs that are being produced on our website. In terms of the next steps, I know some of it is feeding into what RAP is planning on doing next, but in terms of the project itself, the project will have an end, unfortunately, but we're hoping that those that were involved, both partner organizations and those stakeholders that were involved, will continue working and sharing their knowledge and the learnings that they've had from the work to enable more people to take on more of that work.
Great, that's useful, and I think this probably takes us on quite well to our next slide. We've got, I think we have the links here for where people can find more information and all of the outputs from the project. So as you can see up here, there's 2 web addresses you could try if you want further information. The sustainable fibre case studies and the other project outputs will be published on the ECAP website, which you can see up there. The Design for Longevity platform can be accessed for free, and you can see the link there as well. Also, I believe that the slides or the recording of this webinar will be available. Quite a few people have asked for it. Is that correct, Ria or Valerie?
That's right. It will be posted on the ECAP website.
Fantastic. And I think that just about concludes the session for today. Can I just ask you, at the end of this webinar, you'll get a pop-up for a short survey. It will literally only take a minute to complete, but we really appreciate it if you could do that. That just helps us get some further feedback on this webinar and the project overall. So I think all that remains for me is to say thank you very much. Thank you, Ria, Beth and Christina, for speaking today. Thank you for all of the RAP ECAP project partners who've worked very hard to put together a really inspiring program that I think has helped brands and retailers achieve a lot in terms of sustainability. And thank you very much to all of you for joining and listening. If you have any further queries, you can go to the ECAP website, or do feel free to contact you, Ria. Are you happy for people to get in touch if they've got anything they'd like to discuss?
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to reach out, and yeah, very happy to have a chat.
Okay, thank you all very much. Good afternoon.